Welcome back. In this session, we are going to cover the basic of the ACT framework used to create ACT methodologies for assessing companies from different sectors. Why do we talk of a framework? Well, because we are assessing companies in different sectors and with different activities using a common structure or how we think about it, common principles, which is what guides us in our decision making, a common indicator set, the data on which we base our decisions, and a common format to communicate about it, or how we talk about it. It is this common structure or framework that is then used to build sector-specific methodologies that, in this way, are highly consistent in how they are created as well as in their application and outputs. The starting point of the ACT framework is the observation that the low-carbon transition is a process that requires a will to act, and that there are ways to inquire into that willingness to act by corporate citizens. Step 1 is to define the generic questions we want to see answered by corporates. Step 2 is to translate the answer to each of those questions into a comprehensive set of indicators or criteria to evaluate the information gathered. And step 3 is to arrange the set of indicators and criteria in such a way as to condense the information into a standardized rating, which is used to communicate the final results. All these steps are mediated by a set of ACT principles that were established to guide us when we have decisions that imply difficult trade-offs. Let's go then step by step into the framework. In this slide, we show the growth of emissions during the 20th century and first decade of the 21st century, the purple line, as well as the RCP 2.6 scenario, the reference IPCC 2-degree scenario, in red. What we see is an economic system whose CO2 emissions have an exponential growth dynamic. That is, growth that leads to more growth. The 2-degree scenario represents a collapse of that system, but in this case, a voluntary collapse. In nature, exponential growth dynamics always collapse when limits are reached. And because the planet is finite, there is always a limit. When we talk about a low-carbon transition, we are talking of the need to collapse this high-carbon economic system before we reach the planetary limit. That requires a will to act. That action is urgent. We need to peak emissions as early as possible. The collapse is also incredibly fast. Consider that the present dynamic has been gaining momentum for more than a century now. And there are many structural components of our societies and economies that will require reform. The collapse will also be messy and difficult to predict. Who will be the winners and losers of the transition? ACT checks the alignment with the low-carbon transition by assessing the credibility of companies' climate-related information and commitments. We use 5 simple questions to help us to do that. Question 1, what does the company propose to do? Question 2, how does the company plan to do it? Question 3, what is the company doing now? Question 4, what has the company already done? And question 5, how does it all fit together? The first 4 questions express the dynamic vision of companies practicing the low-carbon transition proposed by ACT, and commitments to greenhouse gas mitigation targets are a starting point. From the targets, question 1, ACT evaluates the transition plan that has been developed, which is future-oriented, question 2, and how it is being delivered now, question 3, and how it has been delivered in the recent past, question 4. Finally, It checks if all elements are consistently aligned and if the right governance, risk management, and business model changes are being considered to cope with the level of change required by the low-carbon transition. Question 5. To answer each of the questions, we developed a set of standardized indicator modules. They consider main areas of sustainability practice for any company and cover: Module 1, Reduction Targets, looks at the consistency of the company's announced commitments with the sector's expected greenhouse gas emissions reduction trajectory in a well below 2-degree scenario. Module 2, Material Investments, analyzes the influence of past, current, and near-term investment decisions on the future emissions pathways based on the assets of the company. It mainly looks at carbon locked-in effects of investing in high-carbon assets. Module 3, Intangible Investments, looks at companies' involvement in the emergence of technologies or other practices contributing to a low-carbon economy. Module 4, Performance of Products Sold, focuses on the company's impact on its value chain as a whole and on how it assumes its share of responsibility for the use of the goods and services it sells. Module 5, Management, focuses on the company's integration of climate change into its development plan. For example, what is the manager's expertise in this domain, or is there the establishment of a transition plan? Module 6, Supplier Engagement, focuses on the company's engagement with the upstream part of its value chain. Module 7, Customer Engagement, focuses on the company's engagement with the downstream part of its value chain. Module 8, Policy Engagement, analyzes the company's support of public policies in the realm of climate change mitigation that can help create a nurturing environment for the transition. And finally, Module 9, Business Model. It's intended to ensure that the company has a workable business model, allowing it to use the low-carbon transition as an opportunity. Each module contains from 1 to 6 indicators developed for that specific sector. Here are just a few examples. The Target module contains an indicator about the alignment of emissions reduction targets with the 2-degree trajectory. The key performance indicators can be applied or not to a sector, depending on their relevance. Each model is attributed a specific weight in the final sector. The weight of each model in the final score depends on the sector and the climate issues specific to it. These modules can be applied to all sectors or can be specific to a particular sector. How to calculate the indicators is specified in each methodology, and the calculation itself is subject to small variations depending on the sector. So, we have already seen that there is a common structure provided by the framework, but also a considerable amount of tailoring needed to each sector. In applying the framework to develop sector methodologies, how do we guide the decisions that have to be made? This is done by using the ACT principles, which are relevance, or the principle of selecting the most relevant information to assess the alignment with the low-carbon transition. For example, when we look at targets in the power sector, we look mainly at Scope 1 or direct emission targets, instead of indirect emissions from electricity consumption or Scope 2 targets. Verifiability. The data required for the assessment shall be verified or verifiable. Conservativeness. Whenever assumptions are required, we should be on the side of achieving well below 2 degrees. Consistency. Whenever time series data is used, It should be comparable over time. Long-term orientation. We should enable the evaluation of the long-term performance of a company while simultaneously providing insights into short and medium-term outcomes in alignment with the long-term. The prospective, future-oriented analysis is a key component of ACT. Finally, how is all this put together to come to a final rating? In ACT, the company's overall rating is made up of 3 scores. The performance score, which is based on weighting the different key performance indicators' results. The narrative score, which considers the internal consistency of all data reported, the indicators analyzed, and the narratives provided on strategy and business models. This component is more subjective, but at the same time extremely important. Finally, the trend score indicates the direction in which the company's score is expected to evolve if the ACT assessment is performed again at a later date. In the following sessions of this training, you will look in more detail to the 9 modules of key performance indicators, the 6 criteria used for the narrative assessment, as well as to the trend score. For now, this is all. Thank you.